All right, we are here with Tony.
Yeah.
We just watched some of the matches from the NXT Vengeance premium live pay-per-view.
Yes. I thoroughly enjoyed watching what I watched for sure.
Yeah.
So
Like part of the reason I wanted to watch that with you and kind of chat about it is the style and even the presentation of that is significantly different than what you see on Raw or SmackDown now. Um, NXT much more resembles, I think, AEW or New Japan than it does its uh, sister promotion show with WWE. Um, where did NXT come from?
NXT, well, a couple things. NXT, as we know it today, rose from the ashes of both Ohio Valley Wrestling developmental, Deep South's developmental, which was in Georgia, and also FCW in Florida, which was Steve Keirn's promotion where Dusty had some involvement. I would have to say the roots of today's NXT are probably, I would say, almost directly FCW beforehand. You got to go back to that first couple waves of talent. You had Sheamus, Drew, and then you had Daniel Bryan, then you had Roman, then you had Jack Swagger. You had a lot of these guys, and yes, they wrestled in various other places. I mean, but FCW was like basically the NXT of its day before NXT became of name. Now, NXT, when it started was just all it was basically a hour-long television show that replaced the ECW, if you remember, the WWE ECW.
Yeah.
And it was done very much, I mean, you had a pro and a rookie, so to speak, and they would just have them do all these goofy challenges, and then wrestle also. So I remember Daniel Bryan and Jericho had a real barn burner of a match on the first episode, I want to say. So
how long did we have that? Like, I do remember seeing Drew McIntyre there, and out of all of the people that have kind of graduated from NXT, I think just his look and how he presents himself, and like his persona has really matured the best than I think most other people who have kind of been through there. But so NXT becomes maybe the spiritual successor from Florida and Ohio. We have, like you were talking about, the game show format. When did it become its own brand?
I would say probably, say had done the game show format time and time and time again, and you had some notables, like again, Daniel Bryan won well, he didn't win the first season, but he was the clear superstar of everyone the first season. AJ Lee following, and then also you had like guys like EC3 was in like, the third or fourth season, if you want to even call him that. And it evolved from there and went probably around like 2012-ish, 2013-ish, I want to say, because you had the Florida Championship Wrestling guys still coming in, and it was not as big as it became or it is now. It was just basically the same format. What a couple things coincided with each other. They were closing up Florida Championship Wrestling. They were cutting their ties with Steve Keirn, who was the owner of Florida Championship Wrestling, and the WWE wanted to open up their own performance center, their own facility. It was a passion project of Triple H's for years, and he got it approved. And they broke ground and they made it part of Full Sail University,
Yeah.
where already you're going to get, whether it's the superstars actually training in the business or people who want to get into the business, young professionals who want to eventually get that job working for WWE as a producer, a writer, whatever, you know what I mean, graphic designer. All these elements melted together. The Performance Center wasn't too terribly far from Full Sail. So basically, you had a built in audience. You had this multi-million-dollar performance center, and it was I mean, I guess it's no different than like the power plant back in the 90s, right? Where they would bring in talent and kind of mold and shape them to what they wanted the promotion to be. However, unlike the power plant, I think only very few got by the power plant with great success.
Yeah.
Um, namely Big Show and Goldberg and Diamond Dallas Page being the really big ones. But a young Triple H trained at the power plant, if you remember.
I thought he
So
went to Killer Kowalski's.
he did. He did, and lied on his resume when he went to WCW and said, he had 5 years experience when in reality he only had about a buck and some change, maybe two if he was lucky, and kind of bluffed his way in. And when on his off days, he actually would go down to the power plant and train, to become better because WCW was not running house shows.
Yeah.
Hunter, of course, remembered that format. And of course, it was Terry Taylor, who is still employed today by Triple H, and has always had a job thanks to Triple H. Said, okay, kid, well, how many years have you really been in the business? Because Triple H kept using the 5 years, and he actually had only been in for almost two. So from there, Terry took him under his wing, trained him really good. And then, he, of course, got the ultimate on the job training a year later when he got signed with WWF. So, but he always remembered the concept of the power plant. That was ingrained in his brain. He wanted to do it the right way, basically.
Yeah.
Get a few good trainers and not, I mean, make it physically intense, but don't make it to where, you're going to puke your way out of there like, Dwayne Bruce did, the Sarge. And he did that
Yeah.
with many people. Chased away many people because of that, because it was a very close society back then, but we've evolved. So, it's become more inclusive over the years. So,
Yeah. And Triple H worked with, at the time, Steven Regal. They were paired together, and
yes.
then Regal would be one of the bedrock guys in NXT up until pretty recently, and I'm sure that a lot of it had to do with Triple H kind of learning from him in WCW as well.
Yeah, yeah, and he also was another guy. Regal was another guy who pulled Triple H aside and basically taught him, the ropes early on in his young career. And
Yeah,
Hunter's pretty loyal to people who have actually helped him out. I mean, look at Shawn Michaels. Even, I mean, I think Shawn would be bulletproof anyway because of Vince, but you know for Hunter to give Shawn 100% reigns of the creative in NXT, pretty much, that
yeah,
says a lot.
yeah. I can't think of anybody else that he would trust like that.
Right, right, and that all stems back to him throwing him a solid, when he needed it in his career.
Yeah. So going back to 2012, 2013 ish, was this the time that they introduced the NXT championship?
They had okay, so they had a Florida Championship Wrestling Championship. That was already in place. They had a tag team. They didn't have very many belts in NXT to begin with. It was just a tag team. It was just world heavyweight
Yeah.
and a women's. They only had three belts at one point. And that was by design because there was only an hour-long television show back
Yep.
then. You know, um, the NXT belt that we know and love was introduced around 2012-ish. and was won by actually Seth Rollins.
Yeah, yeah, he was the first one, right?
The inaugural champion, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, they had a big tournament, and Seth Rollins, fresh out of Ring of Honor as Tyler Black, wins the title. And Dusty gives a big ceremony. Dusty gives him the hug and all that stuff because Dusty had a lot. And that was another thing. Triple H always respected Dusty's creativity and character
Yeah.
development. Good, bad, or indifferent. So Dusty always had a job with that NXT brand because when it started, really, Vince gave. I mean, they had developmental guys in place that they signed, but Vince basically told Hunter, "Hey, this is yours. You can do what you please with it," and he did. And but where Hunter was smart was he was smart enough to pluck all these guys and girls from all the independents all across the United States. Because it does not take much to invest, a couple $1 million into these six-figure contracts for guys and girls that they were signing. These guys, they were signing rookie contracts for, $120,000 or, something like that. And, if one of those guys or girls strikes gold, shit, you
And
you got a return on your investment, tenfold.
quite a few people struck gold is there.
Yeah. I mean, Enzo Amore goes on and on about, his when he was in NXT, he made more money, in his rookie years in NXT than he did up on the main roster,
Yeah.
selling merch,
Was this the time where I don't know if it was like entirely up to Vince, but they would sign guys. There is a creative process, and like what happened with Bray Wyatt,
Yep.
they you're essentially becoming like a made man, and you would go through that process, and then in the end you would be brought up to the main roster, but you couldn't skirt that process. Like I think I heard Jericho. I know he butted heads with a lot of the creative TV writers that were brought in, and he was not a fan of that. But the creative process was like a pipeline. You would be put into there, you would go through it, and it was a lot more guaranteed, like what you would end up with when you go to the main roster than they had in previous years. Um, when did NXT? So we have Seth Rollins winning the inaugural championship, like you said. Um, when do we start to see those guys, like the early NXT classes, being brought up to the main roster? So that is a clearly developmental pathway. And who were some of the guys that went down that path?
Well, you got to start with, I mean, Seth Rollins is a great example because you got to start with the Shield in 20, I believe they were 2013 was when they debuted on the main roster, Survivor Series. And that was a big deal, because, but then not too long after were the Wyatt family. Bray having a cup of coffee on the main roster as Husky Harris, pretty much a bland character. I mean, he was good. He could do a few things in the ring. He was for a guy his size, but he was clearly not a guy that Vince was enamored with, so to
Yeah.
speak. So, back to the drawing board, and he, pulls inspiration from Cape Fear, from Layla Mercy, and kind of does his own thing for the 21st century, and Bray Wyatt's born, and yeah, they Wyatt family and the Shield pretty much shook things up on the main roster because here were factions with guys that can go in the ring and were talented at what the gimmick entailed. Also, I'm talking Eric Rowan, and I'm talking also Luke Harper. So
Yeah.
that original Wyatt family there. I know that the same with Shield. I know there were other members considered for those two groups. I know Chris Hero's name came up a whole bunch, and
Yeah.
and you know what? That's not out of the realm of possibility because Hero's work got progressively better. He lost a lot of weight. He had done some great stuff in Ring of Honor with Kenny King actually. Uh, but uh, just something was amiss with Chris Hero. I don't know why. And he's been in and out of the NXT system. Just he's never left the NXT system, it seems. So
Yeah.
and for some guys, it's just that way. Some guys, like a Tommaso Ciampa, rode NXT until he really could not ride it anymore, and they finally had to force him up on the main roster. But
Yeah. They had to pull the trigger with him.
right, but thankfully for him, he didn't have to wait long because that's when the whole Triple H regime took over the main roster. So he was actually going to be used properly. But getting back, I would have to say that early class, what made them successful, and not the game show format, but we're talking that early NXT, early WWE Network,
Yeah.
NXT. I would say what made that successful was the fact that on top of the developmental guys that they had, which were talented guys and girls, they also had their pick of the litter when it came to indies. There were so many indies at that time. And,
Yeah.
Ring of Honor being the big one, Evolve being another big one, and also not ML.
TNA still.
Yeah, TNA. So they would pluck these guys and girls out of this promotion, or out of various promotions all across the United States, and I mean they would hold open tryouts, in different cities, uh, and they just basically rode that format where they would take established names that we all knew and loved, change their name slightly to WWE it up because, of course, they have to own all the trademarks, right?
Yep.
So, but similar enough to where it's not too, like Kevin Owens, Kevin Steen, not that far off. You just had to change the last name, right?
Yeah. Brian Danielson.
Daniel Bryan, like they just WWE'd it enough to where, it's like, okay, we know you're in WWE, that's your name in WWE, but we also know that you're this badass guy from, Ring of Honor years previous or wherever you came from previous. But also, very important too is they looked at New Japan, All Japan, and they also looked overseas. The UK had a booming independent scene at that time. They still kind of do, but it's not as booming as it was. I would say probably the peak of that would have been like 2014 to 2016, 17 ish was the peak of that UK indie scene. But that's where guys like Finn Balor came from, even though he wrestled in Japan and Ring of Honor previous. But, he made his name over in the UK.
Yeah.
So,
So I know that right around this time still, when they would be plucking the indie guys to come through, they all had to go through the developmental process. No matter how many years you had, WWE was firm that you needed to learn their way
yep.
if you're gonna make it up. And so I know CM Punk had a lot of success before coming here, but he needed to go through that. Um, that couldn't have been, uh, you know, I take it that would probably hinder some guys on whether or not they really wanted to come over. Having to learn the WWE basics anyway all over again. I imagine that deterred some people from really wanting to get on board.
Yeah, the only ones that glaringly come to mind are the Young Bucks, who had, a few tryout matches, but nothing ever really materialized, and for whatever reason. And James Storm, actually, believe it or not, was another guy who was heavily considered to come in. And they almost were not going to change his gimmick entirely. Like, he was still going to be the Cowboy James Storm. So I don't know. I don't know what happened there, but but if you didn't want to wrestle NXT or whatever, he didn't feel like he was good. He didn't want to go through that pipeline thing. Um, Young Bucks, I don't know if they felt the same way either, but thankfully for the Bucks, it worked out for him. But for James Storm, it kind of sent his career toiling a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't like he was a spring chicken by the time he got to NXT either.
Well, and I believe AJ's theme song that he has now was originally going to be James Storm's.
Oh, see, that's something I didn't even know. And
Yeah, like
that would,
how Real American was not intended for Hulk Hogan. But yeah, AJ's theme, I believe, was written for James Storm, and for whatever reason that didn't work out, and so AJ kind of got saddled with it.
yeah, and what's funny is AJ and him both. Well, AJ signed, and of course he was the only guy ever not to go through that pipeline. He just went straight up on the main roster. You know, Royal Rumble 2016, I do recall, and yeah, uh, uh, man,
I
what a moment!
remember that music hitting, and then you had Roman in the ring. He was just looking all confused, and everyone's kind of waiting because it's a new theme, and then you just see phenomenal across the screen, and the crowd kind of caught on, and man, was that a really cool introduction to give AJ his uh, main spot in WWE coming out. Like, yeah, that was one of the guys that everybody knew and talked about. And if he wanted to come over and be in, like that's a winning ticket.
Right. And you imagine the crowd pop if, like, say they did what they did with Cody Rhodes recently, right? They did last year at WrestleMania. They kept this theme entirely from AEW intact, and they
Yeah,
still doing it right now. You imagine if AJ came over and, like, they dim the lights, and then all of a sudden you hear, "Get ready to fly,"
yeah,
that TNA, that first part. You didn't have to be like the whole song. It just that "Get ready to fly" thing, you know?
yeah,
It would have been like Jericho in Chicago or CM Punk in Chicago. It would have been just bananas. But
yeah. Well, and
yeah,
his TNA theme is, I think, one of the best themes that TNA ever had. It's really catchy, and again, like whenever I hear that, I just my mind just automatically goes to AJ. I know that nobody else had that theme, but that that would be like the Warriors theme. Those two things just went together. Real American ended up being for Hulk Hogan, and Cody's when he debuted. You have that little whisper in the beginning, and everybody knew that he was going to be the one coming up, but that just really adds so much more to that moment. I think when you have
yeah,
those songs that are just married to guys, no matter where they are.
yeah. It's the ultimate sign of respect for a guy like Cody, who here he was, this big time player, and I mean, he was never AEW champion, but he was a big time player in that other promotion. I mean, Christ, he was one of the VPs. You know,
He was one of the founders.
yeah, yeah, and here he comes to WWE. You figure, we're going to erase all that. But
Yeah,
man, they're making a boatload on marketing with him right now.
yeah, yep. And he is very clearly the next guy. Um, I'm sure that Roman and Sammy are going to have a great match. Um, I do not see Sammy and Cody at Mania.
I don't see it either. And you know what? I was kind of bummed when I figured out they were going to hotshot the match because I felt it was too early. But then I thought about it. They're going to be in Montreal for Elimination Chamber, and obviously Montreal is his hometown, like for real. So
it makes sense.
Yeah, that part does make sense. Now, if they do it in such a way where they can like there'll be a bullshit finish, but then they can come back at some place with this and kind of have him not go away, almost like kind of like how he was for months, like trying to gain acceptance. You know what I mean? But do it the opposite way, where he's just a gnat in Roman Reigns' ass. You know, like if they do it properly, I think they can get a good SummerSlam build out of it. You know, I really do. I think they can headline. I think they can be one of the headline matches at SummerSlam easily if they went that way, title or
Absolutely.
not.
So speaking of AEW,
Yep,
we have Black and Gold NXT. Moving on a little bit to the mid to late 2010s.
Mm-hmm.
It is technically, I think it's still developmental, and Triple H refers to it as such, but it becomes its own brand. They introduced the North American Championship. They redesign the NXT title so it doesn't look like the bastard offspring of the X Division title, and you get a lot more production value out of it. It's still being filmed, I believe. Um, this is where it was no longer part of the Raw or SmackDown taping, right? Didn't it get its own little like at the Performance Center? Isn't that where it was recorded? I'm not sure about that.
They had always the NXT that we saw, knew, and loved back in the the 2010s, I should say, 2012 through about 2017, 18 or so. That was all Full Sail. That was
Okay.
that was Full Sail, and like I had said before, unlike TNA when they were at Universal Studios, people actually paid to get in, you know, and but you know what? I think it was such a hot product. I mean, why not? Right?
Yeah. And so yeah. And so you have Black and Gold NXT. That is going head to head with AEW on Wednesday nights. And so you have the Wednesday Night Wars for a couple years. What was going on there? Introduce us to the Wednesday Night Wars.
All right. So they had this show established and in place. NXT, for all intents and purposes, yeah, it did. It was an hour-long show originally, and it was a very well-written hour-long show. But with AEW on the horizon, and after the big press conference and announcement, WWE felt, hey, we could take this show. USA wanted more content out of WWE, just paid them a huge television rights deal. So that helped. But they wanted another show. So on Wednesday night to compete. And you know, here we were. WWE just happened to have this product that was right underneath their nose, and it was a proven draw, you know, and it drew the same fan base as AEW.
Yeah.
You know, really did. Very similar. And Vince pretty much figured he could snuff it out, you know, real quick. You know, another promotion coming, not a threat. We have our own great product, you know, but it turned out not to be the case. And very quickly, that USA NXT, and even to this day, I mean, I don't watch it. I've watched it very limitedly, but it is not the same as the structured, and I mean structured down to the minute, like the NXT was of 2012 through about 2015, 16 or so. Yeah, it's totally not the same. Uh,
Yeah.
great talent. I will say that, but it is as far as the structure goes, it's getting a little bit better, but it's not. It's got a long way to get back to where it was. You
Yeah.
know.
NXT does end up getting moved to Tuesday nights at some point.
Yep.
And with the I always kind of pinpoint where it becomes more of a third brand instead of developmental when they put the North American championship in there. Then it does. It really is like its own brand. Then it's going forward. Then Triple H has a cardiac event.
Yep.
And he did heart surgery. It was a very serious some type of heart attack, I think it was.
Yeah.
So NXT is no longer his baby, and we NXT 2.0 comes on the scene. What the hell?
Yeah. I just inexplicably the colors changed and the presentation even changed. It was very bright. It was bright before, but it was really bright after that, But in saying that, again, the talent didn't change, meaning like they still recruited some top talent with guys and girls. The one I associate closest to that brand probably would have to be Braun Breaker, being the biggest shining star that came out of that. Um, so, I mean, if anything, if it could thank us for anything, it could thank us for Braun Breaker. I don't know when he's going to ever debut on the main roster. I hope he stays there for at least another year to get some polishing to him before they do it.
Yeah, and he's been.
Many said he was going to be a Royal Rumble entrant this past year, but that didn't happen.
No, I know Keith Lee, and I know I've talked about this a lot with you. Several years ago, when I started to follow the business on a regular basis, Keith Lee was my first new favorite wrestler, and it was great. He was North American champion, and then he was NXT champion, and then he gets called up to the main roster. I believe it was the Royal Rumble 2020 when he debuted. Brock was doing his bulldozer routine where he eliminated like the first 13 or 14 people in a row. And Keith Lee comes out and Brock puts him over. Brock is in there just tearing everyone apart. And Keith Lee is the first person that he kind of gives a little bit more thought to. And he's kind of chatting with Paul outside the ring while he gets in there. Then NXT 2.0 is in there, and a lot of the guys that had come up from NXT Black and Gold kind of go back. NXT 2.0, and actually calling it 2.0 is, I mean, even to this day, I still kind of scratch my head at that. When did we see what I think the end of NXT 2.0 was when Vince had to kind of bow out with his retirement last year. And so now we have NXT. We just watched a lot of Vengeance Day, where it is very much its own. It's definitely its own brand. It almost seems like a different promotion.
Yeah, and again, they're not out of the woods yet. They still have some things to erase, some bad things to erase from NXT 2.0. As far as just a lot of the. I feel like there was a miss with the creative, meaning like with the character development. There was some, but like I feel like some people got fast tracked, in NXT, and others kind of they did right. Like it was a strange hodgepodge of. It almost seemed like a. At one point, like under the Vince regime, it seemed like a cookie cutter factory, where as opposed to, right before, where they were still trying to take their time with talents before they got them, brought up to the main roster. Um, they, they have a lot to undo, but they're not out of the woods. But I have hope that they will be very soon. So,
Well, and I remember 2.0 seemed very grounded in like social media. It had a lot of reality TV kind of a vibe to it, in my opinion. And it's just, that wasn't working for me, brother. That was that wasn't doing it. Braun Breaker, like you said, is absolutely a standout from 2.0. But overall, we don't have 2.0 anymore. They just kind of dropped that after a while, and the like 1992 style like paint splatters that they had for the logo is gone as well. So, um, who do we have running NXT currently?
well, you have the same guy who was in charge before. Well, actually, he was more agenting, which was Shawn Michaels, but now he's more of the guy in charge. You know what I mean? Meaning, like, he's the head honcho. He's where Triple H was back in the early days of NXT. So Shawn has taken over, which is, Shawn's presence has always been felt at the Performance Center anyway. It was Hunter who actually wanted him to take that job to agent matches, because if anybody can agent a match, it's Shawn Michaels, right? And
Yeah,
have a story make sense. But again, it comes down to the talent and what they retained too, because you can have all the moves in the world, but if you don't know where to put them, they're just moves, you
yeah.
know?
It just becomes a spot fest without a story to tell.
Right. And if you wanted that, you could turn to the other channel sometimes with AEW, because you have plenty of guys on the roster that can do spot fest, spectaculars. Um, uh, I,
See,
you know, I, that's where I say I see like not a rainbow ahead, but I see hope ahead with Sean at the helm, because maybe we will get some of that old school. I'm not saying it has to go back to 1988 or whatever. It just, again, it could be all those elements, but implied in a modern setting.
yeah.
It
Well,
really can. And
and
because there's a lot of things in pro wrestling that never go out of style. I mean, all you got to do is look no further than NXT alumni Sami Zayn right now with pulling the heartstrings. Like what he's doing right now is textbook psychology. And he's getting people to care. So that's a hard thing to do now. But he's getting it. He's getting them into it.
well, and having it seems like that the promos and interviews they feel a lot less produced or written. I think if there's a more individual feel for each guy, like given I can guarantee that it was not a TV writer who fed Sammy that he's feeling a little bit oozy today. Things like that, and so uh, some of like the interviews I've seen before recently, specifically in NXT, they all sounded. It sounded like they were reading from a script,
Good.
and you can, in instances like that, you can kind of have maybe a more polished all around product where people aren't kind of fumbling over their words. However, when all of your guys and girls sound the same and there's no individual characteristics or flair to what they're saying and they all kind of do become the same and there's not you don't really have much to work with at that point.
Yeah. Then it comes down to you're not missing much. So
Yeah. Yep. Now, where you had talked about with AEW, where it could definitely be kind of like a spot fest, what really impressed me with Vengeance Day is that you have guys that are pulling out those, I mean, top dollar moves, but there is a story being told throughout each match. A really kind of captivating story in some instances.
yeah.
What were your thoughts from the matches that we watched? You watched the four-way tag, Carmelo and Apollo Crews and Dijak and Wesley. What are your thoughts on those matches?
Dijak and Wesley, I mean, it was classic Davy and Goliath kind of storytelling, which that never goes out of style. With a twist, because obviously there was a lot of really fancy looking cruiserweight spots,
Yeah,
Um I, overall I liked the match. That was it was pleasant to watch. There was a couple times where I was where Lee's selling was just it was befuddling to me a little bit, but that's just me. I'm just being nitpicky. But overall, I liked the match. I told you my favorite match was the Carmelo and the Apollo Crews match. I like that best 2 out of 3 falls a lot. I especially like the fact that he won 2 straight.
yeah,
They don't do that anymore. They do like you win one, I win one, then the rubber match. Like
yeah.
how many times has that been done? That's been done to death. But they
Every
did,
time, pretty much.
yeah, they did 2 straight. I mean, I haven't seen a 2 straight thing. Let's put it this way: I haven't seen somebody win it 2 straight since Steve Austin at Starrcade '93 against Dustin Rhodes. How long ago was that? 30 years ago?
A little bit, yeah.
Yeah, won 2 straight. That was the last time I saw something like that.
Yeah,
So,
I mean, because you have a 2 out of 3 falls match, which they don't do a whole lot anymore in WWE. I don't think WWE did that a whole lot ever, but that was that was the swerve. Is that you were waiting for Apollo to win that next fall, and so you were, expecting it, counting on it, and then that was the swerve. They were
yeah,
able to do so much and tell so much with so little.
yeah.
Like,
Like I said, Apollo selling could have been better, especially on the neck. If somebody really hammers you on the neck, you're really not moving. You're not doing shooting star presses and German suplexes, God forbid, or buff blockbusters. But it all looked cool. I
yeah,
liked. Again, I'll never knock the guy's work. It looked phenomenal. Um, I just think it was poorly placed on his part. Uh, however, I do like Carmelo's selling. He sold consistently the entire time. If you go back and watch that, his selling was all in the right place. He did all like his moves were extra, but not too extra. Pulled it out when he needed to. Like
yeah,
he knew how to place and pull a match out. Then put everything in the right places.
yeah, and
I
and that's
I
yeah,
thought his manager was irrelevant. By the way, did not need it. Why is he there?
probably so Commander Aziz could have someone to throw around when he came out at the end. I don't know.
Yeah, that was irrelevant in my mind because he did nothing to add to the match. But that's just me. Tag team match. Whew.
That was a blast. That was a treat.
There was a lot to look at in there. I mean, my gosh. But I liked it overall. I really did.
Yeah, and like I kind of harp on this too, that the WWE tag team division hasn't been the same since about 1988. Um, and so to see, not just a tag team championship at NXT, but a four-way match that their timing was meticulous. There was nothing in there that kind of, jumped out or were kind of rile up the crowd, for messing up. And
Yeah.
there were a couple spots in there, like the pin breakup, where all of them just jump in the air to break up the count,
Yeah.
and it looks like just like a big car crash after. Like that was great.
Yeah. Honestly, that's something I wish they can bring up to the main roster, and with that influx of teams. I mean, right now we're getting, well, what are we getting? Hit Row and all respect to the Street Profits. They're NXT alumni also, but they very much we've seen their routine, over the last few years, for
In the
sure.
last couple weeks, they're coming out individually now as well. They're not
Yeah.
always together, and so um, I'm wondering if they're gonna break them up and see who stinks and see who swims.
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't know.
I
Well,
think it's time.
I I don't think Hit Row is working. That I can tell you. That's that's probably one of the more awful tag teams I've seen in a long time. Uh Maximum Male Models I like. Not so much for the gimmick, but for the guys in the talent in the ring. They're not bad. Um let's see. I'm trying to think of who else. Well, of course, you have the top dogs, which are the Usos, who, as far as gelling as a team, I mean, really, they've been a team the longest out of, I think, anybody.
Yeah.
So, if they can't gel as a team, something's wrong. However, they have the storyline going right now where you're not sure if they're still a team or not because one walked away in protest from Roman. So I don't know.
And then Sammy stood in for him
Yeah.
for a match after that. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, and it's ties that storyline full circle because you have, I mean, it was Jay Uso defying Roman in the first place for turning was the whole reason the bloodline was started. Everybody knows that.
Yeah.
So that was during the pandemic years. So
Yep.
we're talking what? This is like 3 years in the making. The storyline.
Yeah. I mean, I would actually love to do like maybe after WrestleMania, just like an entire series on the bloodline, like the Usos and Roman individually, because what they have become now is unprecedented in modern wrestling,
Right.
especially in WWE.
And people don't realize the bloodline is vast, strong, and long, meaning like a long lineage of Samoan wrestlers that are they're going to continue to come up. Wrestling's in the blood. And
I
it,
thought Solo was a great addition too.
yeah, yeah, it was. I remember when he debuted at Clash of the Castle, I was like, man, it was only a matter of time before he got in, It's like,
Yeah, and he just kind of walked on to like the biggest storyline in the company, and just settled right in.
yeah, and to think too, and because Solo's not a small guy at all, he is the little brother of the Usos. Little brother. He's as big as the damn Usos.
Oh yeah.
So
Yep.
he's the little brother. But my point being is, you could just the bloodline thing can just go on and on and on. It's like any other family dynasty, whether it be the Harts, whether it be whoever, it's there.
Yeah.
And it's rich, it's strong, and man, a lot of key members in that group. So I look forward to seeing what's going to happen next.
Yeah. And it is neat too, because all of these major guys in the major storylines, I know they can trace their lineage back to NXT. Um, the NXT developmental in Black and Gold has produced, I mean, some of the biggest stars in like the last decade or so.
Yeah.
I mean, all three members of the Shield were world champion or universal champion at some point. Some longer than others, some better than others, but to see like a trio faction that was, I mean, I know that they weren't just kind of thrown together haphazardly, but to see the type of success that all of them had is on. It really is kind of unheard of in modern day wrestling.
Yeah. And I am convinced. Now, Seth Rollins is getting over right now, currently with his character, and has been for I would say the last year. If you're going to be fair, he's really his character has really developed in the last year, even more so than it had before. But I still am convinced in 2015 when he got injured right after his match with Cena at SummerSlam. I remember he blew out his knee, which was I think he blew out one knee and then he came back and blew out the other knee, which totally
That
killed
sucks.
it. Very similar to what happened to Chris Sabin. You know how he came back, he blew his ACL completely out, and then he did the other side when he came back. First match, boom, done. You know, but
Or
it's a momentum killer, man. It really is.
I was
'Cause-
just thinking of Rick Boogs.
yeah. Who's a recent return and also NXT alumni. Yes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Talk about a big fella. You know.
yeah, yeah. That is a monster of a dude. And they needed something for him to do, so he just played Shinsuke Nakamura's entrance. That's what he did. Like to be introduced on the like the big scale, being called up to the main roster. He just walked out and played guitar and looked like Freddie Mercury on steroids, and like it's just over as hell. And then like his first match, he's trying to pull like a John Cena with like the Big Show and Edge, and just goes out. Man, that was heartbreaking, absolutely heartbreaking.
Yep. And it goes to show you may have freaky genetics, but you're not John Cena in the strength department.
Yeah, and I've heard, yeah, and I've heard Big Show and Mark Henry talk about the type of power that Cena has. Um, and it's not just power; it's like control. Like I remember getting the Big Show up there. There's a lot of powerful guys that could kind of rock him and roll him up, and then put him down. I mean, Cena held him there, and he wasn't buckling. And then Edge got on top of him. That is disgusting. That is that is just unreal.
I
That you
remember
could
I
do that.
remember I remember knowing Cena was strong when he picked up the Big Show. I remember he picked him up multiple times for that FU thing, and not with a lot of help, by the way, either. It seemed on a couple occasions. It seemed like he dead weighted the Big Show on a couple of those, but this was back when Big Show was fat. So he did it when he was fat. He also did it when he lost all the weight. So it's like he's just a freaky strong dude. Cena is. So yeah.
All right. To kind of wrap up with NXT,
Yep.
I
We haven't even talked about the women yet either. So, hopefully we can work that in too.
yeah.
So,
Well, and they have the NXT Women's Tag Team Championship
yeah.
as well, and there's again an actual division for that. It's
Mhm.
not where they kind of it was. I remember watching the finals when the WWE had their little match with it was Bailey and Sasha, I believe, who were the first women tag team champions.
Yep.
And I remember watching that, and I was like, "This is real wrestling history. Like, this is a big deal. This is really cool." And then it kind of became irrelevant. And it's not because of the division, it's because I don't think Vince has ever known what to do with the tag team division. And seeing the NXT Women's Tag Team Championship with the division is very encouraging for me, I think.
Yeah. I that was a case where They had so many women on the roster though, and they had no choice but to create a tag team because, I'm sure the women underneath Sasha, Becky, Charlotte, and Bailey all saw the success that they were obtaining, and then before them was Paige, so
Yeah.
they saw the success that those females were having, and they wanted to have some of that. So that then it goes. That's when they just started cranking women out. That's where Mandy Rose and that's where Dana Brooke, the list goes on and on and on of women.
Shayna Baszler, Nia Jax.
Yeah, yeah. You just had women, well, woman after woman after woman. Sonya Deville, they were just coming out of the woodwork, and a lot of them are really good, but also because they were trained by the same trainer. So, of course, they all had very similar styles. However, the women figured it out better than the men, where they were trained by the same person, but they can like kind of incorporate their own little character into and their style into their gimmick. Does that make sense?
Yeah, wasn't it Dusty and Regal, I believe, both had a big part in helping train the wrestlers, the females, in the last 10 years or so.
Regal, yes. Dusty was more of like coming up with a gimmick idea for in promo for a lot of those women. Uh, it was more Sarah Del Rey was the trainer, and she is very responsible for she was an independent name, and she kind of stepped back from wrestling and went into the training role in Florida in NXT, and she was the one who did a really good job of training these women as to how to, you know what I mean, like what to do in the ring, what not to do, and basically train them in a style where they can really compete with the men.
Yeah,
So
yeah. Having the women's Royal Rumble, there have been a couple of years where the men's Royal Rumble has just sucked and the women have blown them away. Same thing with some of the bigger title matches at Mania as well. The women's division is no longer this ancillary gimmick. Like it is a well produced and well put together um, part of WWE. Um, what I wanted to ask about NXT is that maybe you could look into your shiny crystal ball and let me know what we'll what we'll see. I see WWE and NXT. NXT is very different than WWE. I also don't see a true brand split anymore as well. And I think merging or unifying, I guess is the better word, the tag team championships and the Universal and WWE title. It looks like they're going to be two different brands, maybe two different products altogether. That NXT and WWE are it going forward. What do you is what do you see when you take a look at what's been going on with the main roster in NXT?
um, I see pretty much, yeah. I mean, now we're getting back to a point where, again, it's not the glory days of, the 2012 to 2016, 17 time period. However, it's not too far off, because we get new men and women coming into the business all the time, and WWE has the deep pockets, as you know, and they can continue to outsign even AEW at certain junctures. Um, I think providing again, if WWE stays within the states and how it's run going forward, if there is a sale, or whatever,
Yeah,
I see the future looking bright for NXT. Uh, and I think it can only go anywhere but up, really. And I'm not saying it'll put AEW out of business. That's not what I'm saying at all. However, it can provide a very comparable alternative.
Yeah.
Very comparable, because maybe you don't like some of the things, you don't like storylines and stuff going on the main roster, and maybe you are just in need of a good wrestling match or a good spot fest, even. They need, they meaning those kind of fans need a place to go to. So
Yeah. And NXT
real
is
real people pleasing WWE is.
yeah. All right. So part of the reason I was kind of curious about what your thoughts are on that is that Vengeance Day had as Gorilla Monsoon would say, a capacity crowd. And so it's no longer at a college or on a soundstage. It is very much its own brand, own company, and so just seeing the type of production that they're putting into it, it really, and you don't really see people being pulled from NXT to come to the main roster in the same way they used to. I mean, Walter and Pete Dunne, yeah, but I don't see the same parallels like today than we did even like a year ago when they were called up.
Yeah, it's not the same. It seems like the one of the few things they're doing right is taking their time. Again, Braun Breaker's a great example, and I may say this, and he may debut the day after WrestleMania, like all those big debuts happen. But at least they're waiting with the guy. They're waiting still. It's
Yeah.
patience. Like these guys and girls can make it to the main roster. It's not out of the realm of possibility, but also, you really want to take care of your character and get it established before you get up there, because unlike previous regimes, I don't think it's going to be ruined, like it was with because guys like Kevin Owens and Sami Zayn, who are arguably the most popular on the roster now, really had to fight some uphill battles, over the years. Sammy a couple times, but the talent rose through those two guys, and those two are some rare examples,
Yeah.
So not a lot of people made the adjustment well. You talk Keith Lee, he was a great example, like
Corbin.
Corbin. Oh my lord, that's the biggest travesty. I mean, and essentially they gave Corbin's gimmick to Damian Priest. I mean, it pretty much was the same gimmick, only just tweaked a little bit.
And Damian Priest is another great shining example of coming up from NXT to the main roster and doing well.
Yeah, at first he kind of had a stutter stall kind of thing, but I think now with the Judgment Day, just like with Finn Balor, really coming into his own, and Rhea, of course, is coming into her own. Probably one of the brightest shining stars from the NXT UK brand, if any. I would say Walter / Gunther is probably, and Pete Dunne are probably 2 and 3, but Rhea right now, I mean, for a female wrestler, she's up there,
Yep.
But don't sleep on Gunther. He's gonna be
Oh yeah.
he's gonna be in the main event picture, whether people like it or not. And it's not like he doesn't have the talent to back it up, because he does. So
Any final thoughts on NXT or
yeah,
Vengeance Day itself?
Vengeance Day itself. I have to watch more of it. I think you gave me a sampling of these of the 3 matches. I may have to go back and watch the entire pay-per-view. So that's my thought on that one. My thoughts on NXT as a whole. Bright future. Hopefully it stays within the States. Hopefully, so whoever buys the company, if the company is being sold, keep this in mind. If it's being sold, hopefully good things can come to it. Hopefully it can.
Perfect. All right.